It's my sincere pleasure to welcome today's first guest, Gordon McMillan. Gordon has been a leader in the advertising and branding industry in Ottawa since 1996. He founded the agency that bears his name. As founder and chief creative officer, Gordon and his agency have worked on dozens of global B2B brands such as Adobe, Dun & Bradstreet, Intuit, LexisNexis, Microsoft, Oracle, Sophos, and more. But it hasn't always been smooth sailing, and Gordon has very generously offered to share his story with us and tell us how he's going about rebuilding his agency. Welcome, Gordon. Most people had a terrible 2020. You've always been ahead of the curve and ahead of the time. Your company's had a terrible 2019 instead. To get us started, can you kind of fill us in on where your agency was at about 18 months ago?
Sure. First of all, thanks for inviting me to do this. You allowed me to relive the nightmare once again, Anne. Thank you very much. And I must say that the end of 2019 was the most challenging time that I've ever experienced in my profession, and really challenging for the folks who had invested so much in making McMillan the top agency in the city. Basically, I call it a perfect storm of circumstances. What happened in 2019? We'd been working through a transition actually started to think about it in 2016, and in 2018 transitioned to a new leadership team, and I took on the role of chairman and went off to do some other things and just be an advisor. And we did see some storm clouds brewing, and that there was a couple accounts that weren't as solid as they had been, but there was a huge amount of enthusiasm for the leadership team and for the opportunities that we had on the business development front. And for a bunch of reasons, that it just wasn't translating in 2019 into revenue. So we saw a number of our main accounts just started spending less than they had committed to. And we were finishing second and third in new business pitches. And for an agency, this is a really tough thing because you actually end up spending a lot of money to go after that business. So you're spending and you're not getting a return. And so by the summer of 2019, I'd come back in to support the team. And it was really it was tough to change the momentum. And so what we ended up seeing is a decline in revenues, but more disconcerting, I guess, was that there wasn't revenue on the horizon. So we were looking at, shockingly, sort of a 10% pipeline of what we normally had billed year over year. So it was tough. I had left retained earnings in the company, as most small business owners do, but that was being diminished really quickly, and the line. So I had to make some tough decisions.
And when you ran across that time, like, what options were available to you? Like, you've stepped back in, you see your pipeline drying up. Like, what did you do next? Like, you realized, okay, I've got a cash flow concern. I don't see the stuff coming in. I've got a family or a team that I work with day in, day out. And you kind of realized, what do I do now? So where'd you go from there? Once you've realized, oh, I'm in trouble, what do I do?
So there's the emotional and the rational. The emotional side is the first thing I had to do. Is I had to re-engage emotionally with the business, because I had stepped out emotionally. I loved the people I was working with and had every confidence that it would work, and we work really well as a team. So I had to emotionally get re-engaged and sort of have that whole team say, yeah, we're glad you're back and we're going to figure this out. So that was the first step. On the rational side, I had to start looking at options really quickly because the revenue situation was going down. So what I did, the first thing I did actually, Anne, is I looked for investors. So I went to Toronto. I started to look at other companies, even in Ottawa, to look at, was there an opportunity for another agency that was expanding or that needed more staff. Maybe there was some way that we could combine forces. And I actually talked to a local company that was building their own internal agency about whether they would like to do that. So I started to look at partnership options first. At the same time, I was nervous and started to think, oh, maybe I should look at what the other options are in terms of bankruptcy and that sort of thing. And it's hard to do because you're looking at these options even as you don't ever want to take those options. So I'm doing the due diligence, I'm looking at it, but my heart is still in rebuilding the business and keeping it going, perhaps laying off some staff, but being able to keep it going. And there was some decent pieces of business on the line that if they had come through, we would have been able to take a different path. So one was encouraging and being part of the team dynamic, and the other was looking at what the other options are. And so by the fall, when I guess it was probably early October, when it became clear that the couple business development opportunities, the larger ones, were not going to go through. Then it was really clear that we had to look at something else. And so, Anne, I actually went to bankruptcy. I was going to say lawyer, but like a Gingra, and said, what as a trustee, how do I do this? And bankruptcy looked like the best option, but we had a bit of a unique circumstance. Our receivables were mostly U.S. companies, and the trustee said, if you go bankrupt, the chances of you receiving any money from those U.S. entities is kind of nil. They're just not going to pay. They're going to realize that I'm not going to be able to mount a claim, an effective claim. So that really changed things for me, because that was the money that I would have used to compensate the employees that was now going to be gone. And it was really heartbreaking to think that we could be at pennies on the dollar. But he suggested another route, which was interesting, which was called an NOI, a notice of intent to restructure. And under that restructuring agreement, you continue as a going concern, have an opportunity to rebuild, but most importantly, because you're a going concern, all of the receivables stay active and live. And that was quite interesting for me to think of as an option. And that's ultimately what we did.
Okay. So you were going through the proposal, you've done this. When you were taking the next steps and what we're going through it, you said some of the thoughts going through your head, but it must have been a real scary time. Like the unknown, like day to day, you never knew what was going to happen. And you've referenced your employees, and they've been you were like a family. Like once you went through that proposal, like how did you then go about looking at your operations and what you were doing once you were kind of looking at it after a track of where you were going to go on? Like how did you take the next step?
So the first thing is you really need a good internal partner on this. My head of finance, Scott Henry, was amazing going through this process, because I'm a creative guy, right? So for me, it was like it was a pretty fuzzy territory. But I think that what we first needed to do was kind of absorb and understand what the NOI actually meant. And what the NOI meant was that all employees would immediately become creditors at the moment that we activated it, which meant no severance, but that they would get a portion of what we could possibly propose to them moving forward. So that was a shocker. And I must say that the majority of employees were good about it. They said, we've had a great run, and we understand the circumstance. Some, it's just not, it was just a terrible timing. It was in November. So Christmas was coming up, and it wasn't something that was easy to understand as the viable option, even though the purpose of it was to increase the amount of the pool of funds that we could then distribute to employees later on.
So once you're going through this process, this is taking time, you're trying to do it. What are you doing now, or what are you doing different? Because the company's continuing to operate. So how are you operating under this? What are you doing?
Sure. So the first thing under the NOI is that you're obligated, or you're supposed to keep only employees that are involved in active work to bring in receivables. So we narrowed down to about 9 people. So it was a fairly skeleton staff, and really I had to commit to those people to say, this is going to work. This isn't, you're not just here to wind down these accounts. We're going to see what we can do to rebuild. And despite that, half of them left in the next 3 months. And it's tough, right? If you have a mortgage and you're thinking, is this going to work? And we were able to replenish with other people who we had let go during the NOI. Other McMillan people came back into the fold. So what's going through my mind is that we have to collectively figure out how to move forward in a very, very challenging environment. And the brand adjective that I would use that we added in the last year is resilience. There is no doubt about it. It's almost like you just have to have bulldog determination and will that this is going to work. In an NOI circumstance, and anyone who's considering that option, my understanding is that only 10 or 15% of businesses actually survive. It does become a wind down mechanism. And for us, it was really gratifying to see that it could be something else. We negotiated terms on the receivables, and by the third week in January, we're able to put forth a proposal to the creditors, of which we had the creditor of the lease, and then pretty much everyone else was the employees. We were able to put forward a proposal that would offer them essentially 50 cents on the dollar for their severance, and that was sort of close to what the legal requirement is, because our contracts, we always doubled the amount of the payouts. But nevertheless, I don't know if anyone would say they enthusiastically embraced the offer, but I think it was 47 cents on the dollar in the end, and we would have been at pennies on the dollar if we had gone bankrupt. So once we were able to get beyond that, Anne, it gave the team that was left a real focus to move forward, and and that's what we've done.
So you've moved forward. Okay, gone through this. It's been settled. Employees assigned. You want to move forward. You've been very successful in 2020. What did you do to your operations,
Yes.
or how did you revisit what you were doing and how you were
Sure.
doing to suddenly get those wins?
Sure. Yeah. So a lot has adjusted, and what I will say is that the version of McMillan from 2018, 2019, we were building a fairly significant infrastructure to become a larger agency. That infrastructure wouldn't serve us as a very small company. So the first thing we had to do was dramatically reduce our cost structure. And it was kind of prescient in a way, because we started moving towards the environment that we're in now, a virtual environment, way earlier than COVID. So when the pandemic hit, we were already a very lean and mean agency. So a couple of things that we did differently is right away we reduced our cost structure. Now we're actually a completely virtual agency. We don't actually have a physical space. We made everyone, pretty much everyone is billable. So where we had maybe layers of managers before, managers are doers now. Art directors are art directors. Pretty much there's only 2 people in the agency that are there in more administrative functions, and everyone else is a billable resource. And this has helped also for our clients, because our clients are working directly with the people that are doing the work. So there's that direct line of insight. So that was another big thing. I think the third thing that we did is a variable workforce. So we went from 9, I think we're 21 people now. So we did build back quite a bit. Some of those people are on variable contracts and actually have other work as well. So it allows us as a business, if there's a bit of a lull, we're okay, because we can make those variable adjustments, and we're doing it with staff that actually have other contracts, so they're not dependent solely on McMillan for revenue. So those were some of the things that we did, and then the other thing that we did is we just started winning again. To be honest, I mean, we in 2020, 75% of our revenue came from new clients that have never worked with us before. And of the revenue opportunities that came our way, we converted 85% of them, which is really, really high. So I think we just started to do a really good job of being persuasive again about what we offer. And it's been great. And I think the other benefit is we're a global agency, and we've always worked with large global brands as well as some locals. But we are working more with local companies than we have before. And it's ironic that it's partially because of our cost structure. So we're charging in general for our services 25% less than we have in previous years, and yet our fundamentals are stronger than they've been in previous years. So that tells you something about how we've been able to create efficiencies in how we do our jobs.
So you said you now have 85% success when you're pitching something, but have you changed who you pitch to, or why the change in success rate?
No, I think we're pitching to smaller firms. I mean, it's really interesting when you're doing what we do is we rebrand a company, and that rebranding process is as significant if you're a $10 million company as if you're a $5 billion company. And in terms of, the component parts are kind of similar. What changes is maybe the structure, right? And in a large company, when you're doing something like that, there's layers and layers of managers within the company that have to be involved in order to make those changes. It's a bit like a shipping a large container ship turning is a little bit more difficult than a small yacht. But so we've shifted down a little bit in terms of who we work with that, but it's still a lot of business to business. I think that what's changed is, again, that the senior people on my team, we're the ones that are looking forward to that client, and we're just doing, I don't know how to describe it, we're just doing a really good job, and we've had a great amount of success. And I can tell you also, having been in this business for this long, some years you work really hard and you don't get much return, and other years things seem to come fairly easy. And I wish I could say why that occurs, but it just is the way it is.
So there's no change in approach for like the clients you approach, how you evaluate them, who you decide to work with, like none of that philosophy has changed? Or has there been a change in that philosophy as well?
No, that philosophy hasn't changed, and our positioning hasn't changed. Our culture remained strong throughout, even as in 2019 when we were struggling. Our culture remained strong. People really, really had each other's back and support each other, and that continues to this day. And I would only say that, I think that with a smaller team, every morning we have a stand up, where we all meet on Zoom, and I feel like there is, we've gone through a battle together, and when that happens, that does create, if anything, even stronger bonds. And I think that has really, really been important as well. And I think when we're doing presentations, pitches, clients see us completing each other's sentences, supporting one another, and I think that gives them a good comfort level that they've hired the right team.
So you're, at this point, you're back on your feet. And when you look at risks, when you look at other stuff, do you look at anything differently? Your approach, has it changed now in 2021 versus what you were doing back in 18 and 17, or you find that still the same things work?
Yeah, so I think the approach has had to change. We've obviously, like many other services businesses, we've had to find better ways to use online tools and collaboration tools to make the work easier. We've also found that we're introducing clients a little bit more into the kitchen, making the recipe, sharing with them through even channels like Slack. Sometimes we'll have clients that are actually in our Slack channels contributing. So the model has changed a little bit. There's a little bit more of a trust model there. I think one of the things that's kind of interesting is that we've always worked, like 85% of our revenue has been US based. Our latest US clients have never met us in person because of the pandemic. And in some ways, geography now is meaningless in what we offer. It really doesn't matter. And so I think that in some ways that's leveled the playing field. If there was any sort of skew to, oh, we're in Silicon Valley, we should have a Silicon Valley agency, it kind of doesn't matter anymore. So in some ways, the model that we have now works really well within the context of what's happened with the pandemic.
Okay. So for business owners that are out there, and given what's going on, the challenging and unusual times we're in, what advice would you have for them for moving forward? You've been there, you've had to go through stuff.
Yeah.
What would you tell them, or what advice would you give?
Sure. So one piece of advice I would say is to look at all the other options. As you know, bankruptcy is or notice of intent to restructure are challenging options, and if there's other options, you should look at that. Um, to be sort of really cut and dried, there's certain industries that probably will not recover from the pandemic. And if a small business is in one of those industries, I can understand why they might want to consider bankruptcy and just move into another area of business. However, most businesses, or most sectors will continue to survive. And so then the question becomes, how do I adjust to that? I actually went to a restaurant in Ottawa. Shocking. I actually sat in a physical restaurant last night. And what I noticed is, first of all, there was very, very few patrons, and there was very few tables because of the social distancing, of course. But I noticed a lot of takeout. And this was a restaurant that absolutely was not a restaurant that would have done takeout a year ago. So I see that business has adjusted its business model and may not be thriving, but it's certainly surviving and will survive this pandemic as a result. So I think the first thing I say to businesses is, is your sector going to be one that is going to survive? And if it is, then that principle of resilience has to come in, and you have to make some really smart choices about reducing your cost structure as much as possible, your hard cost structure, so that if things start to dip down, you aren't losing money every month. There has to be something that at least gives you the baseline, because obviously, as you know, and government support is going to start to dry up. So there are companies that are just surviving on government support, and they have to find a way to restructure their businesses and make it work without that support.
So in summarizing what you kind of said, so you're basically, businesses need to be more agile, more aware of their costs, and be able to quickly adapt as changes come through is your biggest recommendation to the businesses and other businesses.
Absolutely. I think adaptation and being aware of what that means for employees is really important too. I mean, it's really fundamentally changed. When we bring on someone, we'll often bring them on 3 or 4 days a week and say, can you also do a contract with someone else on the side? Because we want to be cognizant that the dependency on one employer may not be the best way to move forward. It also allows a company like us to have multiple players with multiple skills waiting in the wings and being able to select the right person for the right job. So I never see us growing to the size that we were. We might grow to that size in revenue, but not in employee count.
Okay, so you like the new model where you've basically taken the middle management out, and you have, kind of everybody's hands in, no one to that, and you think that works better for you and the clients, and is the way to go forward.
It's more fun. It's more fun.
Okay, that's good.
It's a better quality. It's a better quality of work life, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's would be our questions for now. I'm gonna just thank you for sharing your experience. I know you started out by saying thank you for asking me to share your nightmare. I know it was a difficult time.
Yeah.
And you provided, I think, a lot of great insight for everyone who's watching us today. All right. So just looking at some of the questions that are in the chat room here. We have one that asks, Gordon, what did you learn about your customers during this process? It sounds like you changed how you work with your clients. Can you explain what drove that change?
Sure. Actually, before the NOI, when I'd sort of come back in the summer of 2019 to try to lend a hand, I talked to a lot of clients to understand what was happening, and they said 4 things: 1 positive and 3 not so positive. The first was, your team does amazing work. The work is always really, really great. And in fact, in 2019, the irony is 2 weeks before the NOI, we were one of the top 10 design agencies in Canada recognized by Strategy Mag. So obviously it's true that we were doing good work. But then the next 3 were a little more disconcerting. You're too expensive, you're too slow, and you're resistant to our ideas. And those 3, I just went, we really can work on those. So even then, I realized that whether the NOI wasn't in my head at that point, but the reality was that we needed to change the way that we worked with clients, um, to be more collaborative with those clients for sure. And it's tough, right? Because we know our business very well, but sometimes a client will say, well, what if we did this? And you just have to embrace it and say, damn straight, that's a great idea. Let's do that. So there was a little bit of a shift, a cultural shift that I thought needed to happen. And then the too expensive was related to the process that we had over the years layered more process in, and that uh, wasn't as agile as the market had moved. Our industry has changed fundamentally very quickly, and so timelines are shorter and expectations are higher, and so we needed to address that. And then those layers also meant that we were more expensive, and so I really needed to rethink how that worked. And I think we could have, if we had the revenue coming in the old model, we would have been able to make those adjustments. But without the revenue, we had to do the NOI just to even survive. But we have taken that forward. So it's a much leaner, meaner team. We still have that client experience person who's managing the relationship, managing the project. Very important to have that. But what I'd say is that that person is relying very much more on the strategy resources and the creative resources to have direct relationships with the clients and make sure that we're getting the work. We're getting that immediate. We have a Zoom call when we present something, and we get an immediate feedback from the client. We actually can even make changes on the fly. We'll share a screen. We'll change headlines. We'll do everything in real time to make that process faster. And frankly, it makes the clients feel much more empowered. Um, so that I think is been sort of the major way that we've been able to reduce our costs and yet increase the fundamentals. Indeed, everyone at McMillan is earning more money now than they ever have before in terms of salary and bonus, which is encouraging.
All right, that's great. Another follow-up question here. Gord, how are you building your team morale and unity when everyone is remote?
Yeah, that has, and I think most of us who are working, especially in services industries, where there isn't a physical ability to meet, that is a real challenge. So I did a few things after the NOI. The first thing I did is I gave what I called a 10% retention bonus to everyone in the firm. So after 3 months, they received 5%. After 3 months, they received another 5%, so that they understood that I was determined to make a future for the company. So that increased the morale right off the bat, because people felt that I was investing in them and also acknowledging the stress that they were going under as we did the rebuild. So that was the kind of thing that started. And then once COVID hit, we have a committee called the Culture Club, and it's not myself, it's individuals within the firm who want to do cultural events, and we've found sort of interesting ways to connect. So the other Friday we had a bingo. We'll have little quiz nights, and that's completely separate from. It's not a top down. It's an employee collective that makes a decision to do these Zoom events. And it has nothing to do with work, and I think that has been a proxy, a way to help address things. We also, when the weather's better, we have meetings in Major Still Park. We all just hang out around a tree, and so we have tried to find physical ways of getting together with appropriate social distancing as well. So those have really helped. And I think the other thing in terms of morale and unity is 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm missing my time today. We have a visual stand-up on Zoom where everyone sees everyone else and they talk about what they're working on. So I think that all of those have helped. I will say that also when we have increased our staff, we've tended, not always, but we've tended to look at employees that we worked with before, who we worked well with, and so they have that cultural connection even as they come into the organization. But interestingly, with this, we also have we have an employee in Winnipeg. We work with someone in Newfoundland. We work with a couple folks in Malaysia, and the distance isn't an issue anymore. So we do have to use electronic tools to create that cohesion.
And how is the difference in that with connecting with the clients? Are you finding the same connection now that you can't see them face to face as well? Or is there any difference in that approach?
We do a lot of face to face with clients. But keep in mind, our business has almost always been international. I mean, we rebranded Schneider Electric, a company out of France that has 200,000 employees. So yes, we would fly over to Paris every once in a while, but honestly, most of the work was done remotely. So it hasn't been. I think what's changed, Anne, is that almost always when we've started a relationship with a client, we've had that face-to-face meeting with the key parties. And if once you've had that face-to-face meeting, you can work for 2 or 3 years and never see each other, and you still have that sort of connection. You had dinner together. That's gone. So here we have, 7 new clients in the last year who have never met us face-to-face. But that's the new circumstance. And so they're even hiring employees in various parts of North America that they've never seen face to face in person. So it's not that different. The paradigm has shifted for everyone.
It's the new reality. It's our new normal right now. Okay, so
we're working with a CMO of a large, one of the top insurance brokers in the world out of Chicago. And we've worked with them for a number of years. And one thing I will mention with this employee, which is important, is that when you go into NOI, it creates great concern with any of your customers that you have. Are you going to survive? What's going to happen to our work? Should we start a new project? And so Valerie might want to comment on this, but it is really tough for a company to then go back to that client base and say, everything's going to be okay. We've got your back. And it's really hard. So we've had to figure out creative ways to do that. We've had to do sometimes discounts. We've had to do credits. We've had to figure interesting ways to allow them to take that first step to say, let's go with you. And this particular client, she's out of Chicago. We only learned 2 months ago that she's been spending all of this time at a place in New Mexico. We're all on Zoom, and we didn't even know that our main client wasn't with her team in Chicago. She was living in the Sun Belt during in a separate home. That's how things have changed with our marketplace. But she stuck with us, and yesterday we got a huge assignment for her to create a consumer brand for her company, and that wouldn't have happened if we had the old model. I think that the new model is working so well that it actually is increasing confidence with the clients that we have.
That's wonderful news.